Hi there everyone, welcome to Devoxx Belgium. Hope you had a good day. Who's tired? Who's just spent 24 hours getting back from San Diego? Who's tired? I'm here basically to showcase a little bit of Apache TomEE. I'm sure you're all familiar with Apache Tomcat. It's been around for a very long time. I'm Andy Gumbrecht. Oh, and we're going to stand by. Basically, I'm a member of the Apache community. I've been a committer on Apache TomEE for about 6 years now. Is Apache TomEE for you? Well, that's kind of like asking you what's your favorite Star Trek episode and whether Catherine Janeway was actually a captain in a Star Trek episode. The choice is yours. Obviously, there's lots of application servers out there, and I'm not going to point you in any particular direction other than to say that TomEE is the best. Just a quick look at Apache Tomcat. What does Apache Tomcat give us? Well, I'm sure you know it just gives us JSPs, it gives us servlets, and it gives us Apache Tomcat. That's about it. I'm sure all of you have played in the past with Tomcat and added your own little architectures and your own APIs and your own frameworks. And it could end up looking something like this. It's what I call pick and pray. Obviously, over the years, you've had a big choice. And that's probably because your application server's been lacking in those features. So what's Apache TomEE in comparison to Apache Tomcat? A whole lot more. So we're adding basically the Oracle web profile to the Apache Tomcat platform, and we got that certified. Around about 2009, we started the implementation. 2011, we had our first release. We were originally Apache OpenEJB. So we took this OpenEJB 3.1 container and we stuck it on top of Apache Tomcat and started to play around with that. Added a few more APIs, and then we realized, this is like adding EE to Tomcat, so we were TomEE. And we've added all these JSRs to Tomcat, so it's been a long road. It's not been an easy road. You can add one or two of these APIs to a Tomcat with a relative ease, but if you want to add all of these together, then it's a whole lot of sewing up to do. It's not as easy as you would think it would be, and I'm sure a lot of you know it's actually a very complicated and tedious process. And so we've done this and actually got it certified by Oracle. So we're passing in the order of 20,000 unit tests to be certified every time we do a release. So you're going to get a stable platform with TomEE. We're also in the process of cleaning up the EE specification. So David Blevins is our CEO at TomEE Tribe, and he's the lead on the Apache TomEE project, also Geronimo. And we're basically cutting out the stuff that nobody needs in order to make that platform a bit lighter, so it's not so heavy. We're already at EE7. We're about to do our milestone release of our EE7 version of TomEE. So if you're looking for an EE7 version, that's going to be TomEE 7. And that is not going to be initially certified because we're waiting for the TCK from Apache and Oracle. And that's nothing to do with the Apache TomEE project or TomEE Tribe. That's an issue with Oracle. Basically, Tomcat's been around a long while. That's not a bad thing. We're really happy that Tomcat has been around a long while. What that means is it's a really, really stable platform. Everybody knows Tomcat. Everyone knows how stable the Tomcat platform is. So what we're basically doing is offering you a path to EE without replacing that stability that you've come to know and love. You can download us at Apache. Simple website, lots of documentation to get you started. So if you're familiar with Tomcat, it's not going to be too hard to get started on the TomEE road. But I don't want to stand here and do like a PowerPoint thing. I'm just going to show you a really simple example, which is actually pretty complicated under the hood. It's made to look easy. Yeah, just before I go on to the code, we did win the Geek Award, and we did win the Oracle Award for our application. So things are progressing for sure. So what was I looking for? I was looking for something that runs on Tomcat that's really complicated and has thrown in all those extraordinary APIs that people have developed over the years. There's nothing really standard about the MyBatis project. That's not to say it's a bad project. It's just a lot of different technologies thrown in together. And so, you know, I wanted to find an application that was running stable on Tomcat and see how that would run on TomEE. I mean, if I just run this up on Tomcat itself, so I'm just running it on a 706 Apache Tomcat. This is just an open source, free application, used basically as a framework to do whatever you want on the web side. And it's a very simple and familiar JPET store implementation of this project. Just takes a few moments to start. So I'm not going to go into any great detail of the project. Basically, you can just see it's a pet store kind of application. It's got persistence and there's Spring and various other elements that sew this program together. But I want to take that and basically show you how easy it is to get this up and running in TomEE. So this would be, for me, step one. Part of this demo, I'll put the link up at the end again, but there's this project which contains pretty much all the elements of the EE specification that have been sewn in to this MyBatis JPET store example. So you could download that and play with this at your will. Basically, all I'm doing is searching for specific text, and that's described in the project. So here I'm just going to search for TomEE step one, and I've created basically some documentation for you to read. I've also bookmarked these. I don't want to do searching all the time. So if you download the project, you can actually use the bookmarks to go to some of these. But TomEE step one. What is TomEE step one? Well, that is basically taking the MyBatis application, dropping it into the application directory of TomEE and firing it up. A little game of spot the difference. Can anyone spot the difference? Where is TomEE and where is Tomcat? Can anyone see? Basically, if you're eagle-eyed, you're going to see 2 more configuration files and 1 extra directory, an endorsed directory. So if you're familiar with Apache Tomcat, you're going to be familiar with Apache TomEE, because there's pretty much no difference. What we've done is added all the libraries for the EE specification and obviously the configuration files to configure those things. So there's going to be no surprises. You just download, unpack, install, and run TomEE in exactly the same way that you would run Tomcat. Okay. It's not showing me my TomEE configuration. That's why I was trying to update in the background. So all I've done is basically set up in exactly the same way I'd set up a Tomcat container, a TomEE container in in IntelliJ, sorry. And I'm just running this, and it runs in exactly the same way. I don't need to do any extra configuration steps. Everything I'm familiar with Tomcat is exactly the same for TomEE. And yeah, you've noticed I'm using a PC, so it's a bit slow, apparently. I didn't fire these up in the background. I basically wanted to show you that this is actually starting the application and running TomEE. There's no magic here. This is just basically the same application dropped into a TomEE container and started. So now running side by side, just a different port. And oh dear, that wasn't supposed to happen. Oh no, it was. It just runs. I haven't done anything, I haven't changed anything, it just runs. So that is basically one of the messages that I have for you today, and that is to drop your application into TomEE and just see if it runs. So what's this going to give you? You just saw the difference between Tomcat and TomEE. It's going to open up all these doors for you. No one is saying when you go onto TomEE that you must go through those doors. They're basically there for you to then walk through at your leisure. So if you want to start playing with stuff, then you can start playing with stuff. I'm just going to show you what we need to do to open those doors. So step one we've already done. We've dropped our application into TomEE and we've started up our application, and it works. When we want to start playing with the EE technologies, then we need to tell our application that these libraries are now available. So step two is to introduce the Java EE API. This is from Apache. It's a collection of all the APIs in the EE specifications, all bundled into one jar file, so you don't need to go and search for them. We do have a TomEE Maven plugin. It's not required for your application specifically to run under TomEE, but it's nice to be able to test your application, and the TomEE Maven plugin allows you to do that. So from the command line, you could run TomEE run, and your application would be deployed to a TomEE container and run up for you. There are also different build goals like exec, where we'll build a complete standalone application. So basically, what people are calling microservices today, it's a fat jar with everything in that you need to run your application, and that's the TomEE Maven plugin. We have various flavors of TomEE, so I would always recommend TomEE Plus. So TomEE, the web profile, is missing things like JAX-RS. Obviously, JAX-RS, RESTful Web Services are really important today. Everyone wants their RESTful API. And so we have an extra distribution called TomEE Plus, and this is just a classifier we add on our application plugin, so that when you run, it will actually pull down an entire TomEE distribution with everything in that you need to deploy RESTful Web Services. We're also supporting Arquillian testing. I'm not actually going to go into that today because there's not going to be enough time to do that. But Arquillian is a framework for testing your application on the actual application server that you're going to be deploying on. Up to today, unit tests have been very unique on application servers, and they're usually deployed to some lightweight container that mimics your actual production environment. Well, here, with our plugin and Arquillian support, you're going to be actually testing and running your application on your deployment platform. And finally, you don't have to do this step, but obviously you're now in an EE application, so just update your web XML for the 3.0 web app profile. That's obviously just adding a few more bells and whistles to your application, and that's all the EE specification added there for you. So now we're going to have a look at some actual code and how easy it is to start opening those doors. So as you can see, I've got TomEE step 1, TomEE step 2, TomEE step 3, TomEE step 4. I've basically gone through this project and provided a step-by-step introduction to all the EE APIs that are used in the EE6 specification. And you could just go through and search for those particular steps. You can see just slightly lower here, I've got the CDI step. Again, we're not going to go into that today. We're just going to stick with the RESTful. So this project and this demonstration is basically for you to take away and download yourself and start playing and seeing how easy it is to use these technologies. So what do I need to do to make my first RESTful API? Well, you'll actually be surprised how simple it is. All we're doing here is annotating a POJO. So simple, plain old Java object, and we're giving it a path. We're going to be scanning for these annotations. So TomEE tries to be lazy loading in as much sense that if you're not using specific APIs, we're not going to fire up those containers unless we have to. So we'll scan your application, and the second you start using something like path, we know that you want to start running the RESTful container, and we'll fire that up for you. There are other technologies, again, in this, which I'm going to skip over because we're just going to follow straight through the REST scenario. So I need to separate my application. So when I'm providing a RESTful API, we define a REST application. And all that does is give us a namespace that separates our RESTful API from our application API. Obviously, our pet store is running under a particular root, and we need to, if that's running under the root directory, then we need to separate that from our RESTful API. And so all this is doing is defining a RESTful application within our WAR file. Oh, wrong button. My RESTful endpoint is going to be a complex type. Obviously, you've got your native types. That would be a far too easy example to demonstrate here. When you're going to be developing your RESTful API, you want the ability to actually send, transmit, and receive complex types. This is an XML complex type, but it could be JSON annotated as well. There's JSON and XML parsers for your complex objects, and they basically consist of your familiar properties. And so now I'm going to expose this, this complex type. And again, I could have made this much, much easier and just use a native type like string or int or any of the others. But this just gives you a flavor of pretty much how complex it gets. It doesn't get much more complicated than this. So I'm producing application JSON, application XML. So my caller knows what I'm capable of delivering. So it could request delivery of a JSON object, or it could request delivery of an XML object. The get method is obviously an HTTP GET. And the path is just an additional path to my POJO. So if I wanted to access this application, I would need to call my application namespace, then my path namespace, and finally my endpoint namespace. And you can see I'm just constructing a really simple POJO object, and I'm returning it. So there's nothing really complicated about this method. It's very easy to implement. This is just an example of a client. So with the EE6, they kind of missed the beat. It's been done in EE7, but EE6, there was no client API for accessing your RESTful endpoints. You were kind of left to your own devices, and various implementations were developed. We're using here Apache CXF because that's what we're using on the server side, so it's easier to serialize and deserialize. But with EE7, we now have a full API for extracting information from RESTful endpoints in a standard format. But it looks very, very similar to what we're seeing here. So I'm accessing my client, and you can see app was my application path, API was my RESTful path, which I've added to the application, and then my REST was the POJO object, and complex is my endpoint. I can have multiple endpoints in my REST path, which is why you saw on the POJO object, we had a path annotating the object itself, and then a path annotating the method. So I can have many methods within one particular POJO object. This is nothing particularly to do with REST itself, but just a nice example of when you're actually extracting asynchronous information from your server in a Swing client that you're using and checking your dispatch for your safe object. So you can see I've received an object, that's my complex type, that's been deserialized from the server, and I can now use it anywhere in either a light client or a heavy client. I'll get the right key eventually. So now I'm actually in my client application. I can render this complex type. So there's nothing complicated about this. I'm providing a RESTful endpoint with a complex type, and I'm calling it through a web client and exposing that in a very simple endpoint application. So because this object's been defined, and I've added this to the MyBatis project, it's obviously not going to work if I keep typing in the code. And this is basically a very simple Swing application that's going to communicate with this endpoint. So you've seen how easy it was to define the endpoint, and literally just clicking this button will access that object and print it out. And I can click that button and receive that complex type as often as I want. So what seems very simple is actually very complicated in the background, but done in a very simple manner. There's nothing complicated about the code. We've taken all that complex sewing together of all these APIs, and all you need to do is start using them. So the day you take your Tomcat application that can be as complex as the MyBatis JPET store and drop it into TomEE, you can start defining your own RESTful APIs. Once you've got all that set up, then I am going to have time to show you a little bit of Arquillian. That moved quite smoothly. So Arquillian, what is Arquillian? Arquillian is basically a framework that wraps itself into things like JUnit and NUnit, and provides you with familiar unit tests of your entire application server. Arquillian provides you with bombs that have all the imports, so they have all the dependencies. You don't need to go and hunt those down, you just need to import the Arquillian bombs. And actually, there's a more recent version of this that's going to be in my talk on Thursday on Arquillian Cube, where these bombs have actually been unified and pull in even more of the dependencies that you need to test. So you can see it's just JUnit. We don't need anything more than JUnit. And the Arquillian plugin that's provided by TomEE. So this Arquillian plugin basically takes all your information that's in your application, wraps it up nicely, packages it together, and sends it to the server for deployment, and then tests against it. So this is just the Arquillian JUnit container. So that's basically to complete the Arquillian BOM and the Arquillian JUnit container. So we just add the TomEE plugin and we're ready to go. When I'm testing, I like to test my application as if I'm a remote client. So one of the things here that's just added for convenience is the HTTP client. There's no magic behind this. It's just the Apache component for making HTTP requests against your server. So Surefire, that's just the Maven plugin for testing. Everyone should be familiar with that. And then we have the Arquillian configuration file. And again, this is too much information to go into detail, but all this is basically saying we need our application server to run and how we want to run it. You can see we're using -1. That's basically TomEE specific. Other implementations or application servers will do their own thing. All that's saying for us is we're going to use a random port. That means we can run multiple tests in parallel against application servers, and they won't have port clashes. And then to create your Arquillian test, all we're doing is run with the Arquillian class. That basically tells JUnit this test is going to be run with the Arquillian framework, and please give me all those dependencies when you make this test. Okay, I'll go back. So the test basically consists of a deployment. So my application obviously needs to be built, and this is done by our shrink wrap API. Here we're defining a web archive, and we're adding some of our classes. So you don't need to add all your classes if they're dependent on each other, but here you're basically building a lightweight version of your application. You can mock out any complex types that you have, and this creates a real WAR file and sends it to the application server for deployment, and then we test against it. We can inject elements from our application, so these will be proxied from the server, so we're actually talking to our server, we're not talking to some mocked implementation. And then we can run these tests. And that's basically a very simple Arquillian test. So I just have 3 tests, and these are talking to our application server. It takes a lot of understanding to realize what's being done here. A typical unit test, you're going to be testing small elements of your application in isolation. Here, we're taking all the elements of your application, sewing them together in a shrink wrap archive. They're being physically deployed to the application server that's fired up by the Arquillian container. We're then testing against objects that are deployed in that container. So this is real-time testing of your application. It's a really powerful testing mechanism, and you should be using it if you're running any kind of application server, not just TomEE. And then just to finish up, my test Arquillian Holy Moly, which is a bit holy moly. Obviously, applications become increasingly complex as we develop them. And we're just adding here JAX-RS, so we're going to have a REST endpoint. Again, we build our archive in the deployment. And you can see this looks a bit scary until you actually start to read it. What we're doing is building our descriptor dynamically. So our web descriptor might be pages and pages of XML, and we're only testing a small element of that application. So we don't want to build that XML every time. We're just building a small snippet of XML. We're putting together a slightly more complex shrink wrap archive with all the elements that we're going to be testing. We're switching on with our beans XML things like CDI, which tell Java EE that CDI is going to be used. And EJB jar just tells us scan us for EJBs and other annotations. So it looks slightly more complex than it actually is. And our test also looks slightly more complex than it actually is. All we're doing here is building a very simple SOAP request, and we're testing a web service that's deployed on the server. And so you can see with Arquillian, your tests become as complex as you need them to be for your application. And again, you can mock things out. And that pretty much sums up TomEE. So my message today is really, if you're using a Tomcat legacy application, I'll stand here and I'll promise you it will work in TomEE. And if it doesn't work in TomEE, you get back to us on the Apache website and we'll fix it for you, because it basically means we've done something wrong. That's it. Thank you very much for your time.